Welcome. Or no, I guess, Liam, you're going to
Yep.
introduce? I'm sorry. Taking your
Hi,
role.
everybody, and welcome to this latest presentation brought to you by New England Federation of Humane Societies. Some housekeeping things. Uh, Up on the right-hand side, if you haven't figured it out right now, we have the doobly-doo, which has the chat, the Q&A, and participation buttons. If you can, introduce yourself, say hi in the chat section. If you have any questions for our presenter, please type them in the Q&A session, and we will try to get to them throughout the presentation or at the very last part of the presentation. Uh, there will be certificates issued at least an hour after this presentation for anybody who's been on the presentation for more than 60 minutes. Any questions regarding acceptance of CEU should be directed to the authority who grants the credits for your organization or the state. This session is being recorded for viewing later on. And lastly, we were doing breakout sessions, but at the end of the presentation, time permitting, we will have an opportunity for more Q&A or even some participation. So we will let you know when we get to the end of the presentation how that's going to work. So right now, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Rebecca Lones. And I'm going to turn everything over to her. And just so you know, there are cats in the house, so they may introduce themselves at some point during the presentation. So thank you very much, Rebecca. It's all yours.
All right. Hi. Thanks, everybody, for showing up to learn about cat behavior modification. I love talking about cat behavior, so I'm super excited to spend some time with you talking today. Yeah. And anyway, it's the last talk of the conference, so who's excited for that? I mean, it's a little sad. It's bittersweet, but thanks for being here. Again, my name is Rebecca Lones. I was in animal welfare for a little over 10 years. Before that, I was in wild animal behavior. So I have a bachelor's degree from Yale and a master's degree from Cornell, where I was working with wild animal behavior, behavioral ecology, doing some public education before that as a field biologist. And then when I did my master's project, I trained my dog to help me find the birds that I was interested in. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so much more excited about training this dog than I am about studying these birds. So I sort of switched gears and went into companion animal behavior and then worked at the Tompkins County SPCA and then Lollipop Farm Humane Society in Rochester, New York. And then I actually left with one of my behavior team members from Lollipop and started Young Lion Training and Behavior. And we are now out on our own. And I'll tell you a little bit more about us at the end. But along the way, I've worked with thousands of cats and dogs and their people or the shelter staff who are taking care of them just to help improve their lives and help educate people about learning their cat or dog's behavior. So these are my two cats, just to introduce them in case they do make an appearance later. Both of them were foster kittens that I had and then subsequently who stayed. I fostered a lot of other kittens who did not stay, so these two are pretty special to me. So that's Grumpkin on the left. She was a bottle baby. She came in very, very young and was in kind of rough condition, as you can see. And she was the runt of the litter and has just turned into a fluffy, beautiful queen. And Johnny is on the right. He was found as a singleton kitten under somebody's porch, and he was a little bit older, and it definitely struggles a little bit with being shy. So you see a couple of videos of him later, and you'll see some videos of her as well. But it kind of tends towards the more overstimulated occasionally, really smart, very confident. And he's a little bit more shy, fearful. So we kind of have the gamut of cat personalities in the house in terms of enrichment strategies and training things that I do with them. So before we talk really about modifying behavior, I want to do a little body language review. So for those of you who haven't been thinking about cat behavior in a while, or maybe, this is sort of your first foray into really thinking critically about cat behavior. A lot of these things are going to be behaviors that your brain already knows, but maybe you don't know exactly what your brain is telling you. It's sort of like, oh, that twitchiness, that's what I'm picking up on. And we're just going to do this really quick because this could be, we have like a 2-hour class on this that we do through Young Lion. So it's really important, especially in an animal welfare context, that we all stick with observations. So instead of stating our interpretation, so the cat in F9 was really angry today, that's an unhelpful note on a kennel card. The cat in F9 was hissing, swatting, pinning her ears, vocalizing. That's really good information. Those are all observations. So we try as much as possible, especially in animal welfare, to stick to the observations when we're talking to each other and leave the interpretations as not as helpful labels that we might discuss later on. But in general, you want to look at what specific body parts of the cat are doing, what specific actions are they taking when you are thinking about how are they making progress or what's their baseline right now. And you always do want to know your cat's baseline. So this is much easier when you're in a foster situation or you're working with an adopted cat. When you're in a shelter, it's so difficult to know what the baseline of the cat is. And we have to kind of assume that their baseline is sort of the average cat's baseline, which isn't always true. But any behavior that's off of that is good to investigate. But like some of my clients who have had their cats for years know, oh yeah, so, his ears always do that. And it's not like related to his state of mind. Sometimes those assumptions are incorrect, which we can also examine. But in general, it's much easier to do in a home setting than in a shelter. But anyway, we're going to go through really quickly traffic light system for some cat behaviors. So green light behaviors are pro-social behaviors, things that cats do when they want us to move closer to them or interact with them, especially in a petting and touching kind of way. So that's cheek rubs or headbutts, purring or chirping. Purring does have the caveat that it could be a stress-related behavior. So cats can purr when they are afraid or stressed or in pain. So it can be a self-soothing behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy and relaxed, and that's a commonly misinterpreted behavior in shelter settings for sure. But most of the time, especially if you're seeing other relaxed behaviors, it is a relaxed behavior to see. Other things, chirping, so that short, high-pitched meow purr that some cats do, having their tail up and over their back. So this cat on the right, this little bookstore cat, has a pretty nice high tail, little hello flag on the end, a relaxed posture. They're not coiled into a tight ball. They're not arched into a big puffed up cat. And then blinky or almond shaped eyes. Red light behaviors are also pretty easy. These are things, like I said, your brain knows these behaviors. So hissing, growling, swatting, or biting. Putting teeth on someone is communication. I really don't like the term love bite for cats because, with working with the public, sometimes someone can say like, yeah, it was just a love bite. Oh, but I had to go to the hospital and get antibiotics. Like that's not, they want to say it's a love bite because they love their cat. But at the same time, any kind of bite, even if it's inhibited and it doesn't actually hurt, is the cat communicating something. So biting is definitely on the red light behavior. Stop what you're doing. Give the cat some space. Halloween cat is a highly technical behavior term. I'm just kidding. It is. We call it that because it's easy to know what we mean. So when the cat arches their back, puffs up out all their hair, and tries to make themselves really big. And then you might also see a thrashing tail, and that tends to be a space increasing signal, a cat saying, I want some space. And then yellow light behaviors, so things that cats do when they maybe are getting a little bit overexcited, or maybe they're getting a little bit frustrated or a little bit fearful. So things that they do when they're not happy and relaxed. And those are twitchy ears or skin or tail, their ears being down and back or flattened out, extreme pupils, so super dilated pupils or super constricted pupils, and then crouched tense posture, so like trying to curl themselves into a ball. can also be a yellow light behavior. All right. When we're thinking about behavior change through behavior modification, one of the things that we have to think about sort of foundationally are the training methods that we would consider using. So to that end, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the ethics of animal training. And what I want you to take away from this is there's not really a debate. And for cats, it's much less controversial than it is for other animals like dogs and horses. But we know science has shown us that the least stressful, most effective way to train is through positive reinforcement. And there is a framework called the humane hierarchy that if you get into heavily into behavior modification, it's a good thing to know about and to use. It's basically a tool that gives you a pathway to take when you're thinking about behavior change. So it starts from simple things like, is this animal, are all their health needs taken care of? Are they comfortable? And then is there something in the environment that's triggering the behavior that we could potentially change? So I see in some shelters where cats, and I've worked in shelters where cats are kept in glass rooms and there's no visual barrier between the glass rooms. And sometimes that can lead to barrier frustration and a cat flinging themselves at the other cats that they can see but can't get to through the glass rooms. And one thing that you can do there is, can we change the environment? Can we put up some opaque film so that they can't actually see each other? And often that solves the behavior right there. So that's a super simple and very low stress way to change the behavior, is changing the environment to make the behavior less likely to happen. From there, then we get more into what we think of traditionally as behavior modification. So we might be reinforcing in alternative behavior. We might be doing some counter conditioning. We'll talk about some of these things a little bit later on. But we always want to make sure that the basic needs are addressed and that there's no environmental changes that we can make as we work our way up the humane hierarchy, which goes from the least stressful to the most stressful behavior changes. We always want to make sure that we're giving lots of information about the behaviors we want to take place. So we want to reinforce the behaviors we want to happen more often. So behaviors we like should result in pleasurable outcomes for the animal. A lot of times, if I'm working with a client or I'm working with a staff member at a shelter, they'll say, well, we want the animal to stop doing X, stop doing insert behavior here. And, you always want to try to flip that on its head to say, well, what do we want the animal to do in that situation? So not just we want them to stop doing this behavior. So what do we want them to do instead? And one big takeaway is really, really don't use fear or intimidation as a training tactic. So these things, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but these things can have a lot of unintended side effects. There are some resources up here. This would be a good slide to take a picture of or a screenshot of. So you can look up some things later, but all of these are good things to look up and to read. Some of them are more dog-centric, like the anti-prong collar campaign. But there are still studies, if you're into reading the primary literature, there are still studies attached to that campaign that could be sort of extrapolated into the cat world of when you use fear and intimidation as a training tactic, it can have a lot of fallout, including increased stress and anxiety and aggression.
Just to interrupt you real quick, we have a quick question.
Sure.
Is kneading always a green light behavior, or like purring, can it be self-soothing?
Kneading is typically a green light behavior. I would say I can't think of an instance where I've seen a clear, I am really scared and kneading. Much more common to see like I am in a tiny ball and I'm really scared. Maybe I'm at the vet or maybe I'm in a new cage and I'm purring to soothe myself. So kneading is typically, much more relaxed and really a throwback to a time when they're happy and relaxed because it's something that they do to, as they're nursing as kittens to get the mom to release the milk. So typically not, but that's a great one to know your cat's baseline. So if they're at the veterinarian, getting an exam, and that usually is kind of scary to them, and they are really tense and they're curled into a little ball and their ears are back, but they're purring and kneading their paws, it'd be safe to assume that they're pretty scared at that point, even though they're kneading. So that's a good question. I haven't seen it, but I'm not going to rule out that there's not a cat out there who may do that when they're scared. Okay, talking a little bit more about punishment. So for cats, typically, these are things like, I have had clients tell me that they spank their cats or, yell or try to scare their cats with like a penny can or a squirt bottle. So all of these things, there are some problems. In addition to the side effects that I listed already, it doesn't teach the animal the right thing to do. It just teaches them to stop, but you're not teaching them a new behavior. And really, it often doesn't teach them to stop. It just teaches them not to do the behavior in front of you and in front of whatever aversive you're using. So I'm sure you've all heard people say, like, he doesn't go on the counter as soon as I just have to shake the squirt bottle at him and he stops doing it. And, I think on one hand, like, that cat is getting a little bit stressed every time they see the water bottle, and they could be associating that stress with their person, and we definitely don't want that to happen. And on the other hand, they're definitely not learning not to do that behavior. They're just learning to be mindful of where the water bottle is and to avoid that. So a lot of times with like jumping on the counters as a good example, a lot of people try to use punishment to address that. And what it turns into usually is that the cat will jump off the counter if they see the person or the squirt bottle or whatever penny can thing that they're using. But then if the person's not there, they're on the counters. And they're cats. They like to go up high. They like to explore and sniff around. They like to forage. So they're probably going to be on the counter. So I always tell people who have this issue and want to address it, like, we really need to focus on teaching them appropriate behavior when you're there, giving them a perch up high to hang out on. And then we need some acceptance as well, that if they're a cat and if you're not there, they're probably going to jump on the counter, and you should just wipe your counters before you start to prepare food. So there are lots of position statements you can look up. A couple others that I listed here. The feline practitioners also have a position statement about this that is cat specific. So when you're looking at a behavior that you would like to change, the approach that I would recommend taking is always to think first about what is the function. So why is this animal doing this behavior that we're trying to modify? Is it fulfilling a species typical need? So the classic one for cats in homes is they scratch, and that can be a problem for some people, but that is a species typical behavior. And species typical behaviors are behaviors that animals do because they are the species that they are, and it is within their set of instincts to do. So scratching is one for cats. They need to do that. We need to give them an outlet for that. So a lot of times the behavior could be fulfilling a species typical need. Is it attention seeking? So has the animal learned to do that behavior because it gets our attention? That could be the function. Our attention is the reinforcement in that situation. Are they doing it for cognitive stimulation? So they're super bored, so they're looking to exercise their brain or even exercise their body. Are they inventing things to do because they have nothing else to do during the day? So these could all be the functions of a behavior. And the other motivating factor for a behavior can be some extreme emotion. So are they super fearful and that's why they're acting a certain way? And in those cases, we need to sort of switch their association with the trigger that's making them fearful. So we always kind of, step one, start with what's the function of this behavior? I always strive to avoid labels whenever possible. I think it's not helpful either in a home or a shelter setting. So saying he's a really good cat, or he's a really bad cat, or he's a really stubborn cat. One that I sometimes get still with cats is, he's a really dominant cat. And usually what that means, because dominance is not a motivating factor for cats' behavior, nor is it for dogs. a lot of times what that means when people say that is that the cat is really confident and they don't have um, a good outlet. They're often like confident and bored. So they like invent things to do and then people say, "Oh, he's climbing my leg because he's trying to dominate me." Um, so that labeling of the animal, it kind of pigeonholes them and it doesn't really address the root issue that we're dealing with. So a lot of times in a shelter setting, I've been called in to look at a cat and they'll say, "Oh, it's just an old cat, and that's why she's swatting when you touch her tail." And then it turns out she has a lot of arthritis. So, like, just labeling cats as it's sort of giving an excuse for their behavior because of like that's the way that they are just isn't useful. It isn't helpful when you're thinking about behavior modification. Cats do what works. They do what is effective to get the reinforcement that they want in the environment. And when we can really drill down to what behavior are we trying to change and what's the circumstance surrounding that behavior and what's the function, what are they getting out of doing that behavior, that really allows us to think about how we're going to change the behavior. And then thinking about quality of life, just a little bit to touch on this. There are some problematic behaviors that can affect quality of life. So fear is one, and I would say aggression is another. So if you are feeling really fearful all the time, you're not really living free from fear and anxiety. So behavioral health is living free from, or mostly free from, fear and anxiety, and being able to do species typical behaviors on a regular basis. That would be a great behaviorally healthy animal. And so some of these things do affect that, like fear, like aggression. If you are showing aggression on a daily basis, you're not a happy cat. There's something going on that's really distressing to you, and that is affecting your quality of life, and that's showing up as aggression. And then there are other behaviors that are just annoying to humans, like scratching is not a quality of life issue. Trying to stop them from scratching can turn into a quality of life issue, but being super active at night isn't a quality of life issue to the cat. But it might be annoying enough to their human that they're considering, some welfare consequences that could affect the cat's quality of life. So it's sort of from the human's perspective, it doesn't matter really if the behavior is bothersome to them. Modifying it doesn't really matter if it's affecting the cat's quality of life or not. But this is just for you to know that sometimes a behavior that a cat is doing isn't affecting their behavioral health. It's just annoying to the human, and so we still need to address it. Okay, so I talked about this before, but these are kind of the first 3 steps that we would go through for changing a behavior. We would make sure that all their enrichment and medical needs are addressed. So this is where in a shelter setting, you got to get really good communication between your different teams. Your behavior team, if you have one, your animal care staff, so that they're doing daily observations, and your medical team to make sure that any underlying causes that could be affecting the behavior are taken care of. Because like that cat who, when you touch their tail and they swat, we could do all kinds of handling behavior modification, but if she's painful and that's what's causing the behavior, until that pain is addressed, we're not going to make a lot of progress in behavior modification. Changing the environment. So like I said before, if we can change something about the environment, if we can create a management plan that will make this behavior less likely to happen, that's a very low stress way to change a behavior. So we're always considering those options as well. And then rewarding or reinforcing desired alternative behaviors. So we're often teaching what's called incompatible behaviors. So things that the cat is going to get heavily reinforced for doing it within the context of the problematic behavior. And over time, as you reinforce the cat in that scenario for this alternative behavior, they will start to naturally pick that alternative behavior instead of the unwanted behavior. Just like rewarding them for staying off the counters, staying on a chair or a stool instead, over time they'll start to go right to that chair or stool when you're in the kitchen instead of jumping on the counters and having to be redirected to the chair or stool. And this is really this is really mostly where we're going to kind of put a stop sign. So I don't ever recommend using pain or force to address an issue. I think that kind of the dichotomy, it's a false dichotomy of like, well, I would do this to save this animal's life. If you think that you have to go to physical punishment, I would challenge you that I don't think that you've evaluated and carried out a strategy effectively that's going to be lower stress for that animal. I've been doing this for over a decade now, and I have not been in a situation or worked with a case where I think, okay, now we need to bring in some kind of, force or aversive or punishment to work with this animal. Okay, so one really common tactic that we're going to talk about in a couple different scenarios is counter conditioning and desensitization, which is a mouthful. And basically what it means is that food is your friend and you should use it effectively. Food is super exciting for most animals. And if they're not super excited about the food, it could be because they're a little scared right now. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to eat it after you leave. So with counter conditioning, what we do is, so say that A is the scary thing. So big scary thing has this negative emotional reaction attached to it. But B is the fun thing. So typically we use food because it's fastest, but you could use play as well. So if A is always followed by B, then the animal starts to associate B with A, and the emotional reaction to B starts to be associated with A as well. So when I'm in a shelter setting working with a fearful cat, I might always walk in and I'm the trigger that they are reacting to. And then I am always dropping off some baby food or some churro or some tuna, some nice meaty treats. And that's B. So over time, they'll start to learn to anticipate that the food is coming just when they see me. And then that will change the way that they feel about me. And it can work in reverse. So you want to make sure you're doing your order of operations correctly, because if your cat is scared of, say, the vacuum cleaner and you're trying to use food to lure the cat over to the vacuum, now you're teaching them not to trust the food. So say, like every time I do the vacuum, I'm going to give them some cheese, and it's this special cheese. I'm going to save it just for that. And I get my cheese all ready. Over time, the cats are going to start to be like, oh no, she's getting the cheese ready. The vacuum cleaner is about to come out. So they can learn that the good thing predicts the bad thing just as easily as they can learn that the bad thing predicts the good thing. So you want to make sure you're doing it in the right order. And then to make it even more effective, you want to control the intensity of the trigger. And this is most easily done if it's an audible trigger. You're going to do something really quiet, or you're going to have the animal further away from it. If it's a visual trigger, again, further away. If it has something to do with duration, so like nail trimming where they have to be held for a while, you're going to start with short amounts of time being restrained. So make the trigger a low enough intensity that the animal can easily handle interacting with the trigger. And then you're also pairing it with food. So as you pair it with food over time, their tolerance for the intensity goes up, and you can start to dial up the intensity until you're at the full expression of the trigger, whatever it is that you're working on. And we'll break down a few specific cases. All right, I just want to pause here. Are there any questions? Okay, sounds like no.
No, nothing so far. So
okay. All right. And so we'll keep going. Just to tell people, I am only looking at my presentation, so I can't see the chat or anything. So that's why I'll stop periodically and ask if there's questions. Okay. So looking at a couple different types of common things that we might do behavior modification for with cats. One really big one is fearful behavior. So towards the end of the time that I was working in shelters, we were starting to get in a lot of large groups of cats from single houses. So they were sort of socialized to people, but sort of not. Like they had seen people, they had lived in a house, but there were so many cats that it's impossible for one or two people to give them the kind of socialization that they needed when they were young to really be interested in interacting with new humans. And so working with cats like this, they can often be worked with and made into nice companion animals and go into homes successfully. I think that sometimes the tendency is to sort of push them into homes without a lot of support. And I think with a little bit of work, they can feel a lot better and you can start to see much better behavior from them. So some additional signs you might see in a shelter or a foster are that they're really avoidant of contact with humans. So if you move towards them, they move away. They're hiding. And as we all know, cats are super good at hiding. I have been in some places looking for cats, including crawl spaces of houses. It's not great, but they're great at hiding. And one of my cats is joining me now, so she might chat a little bit as well. Inappetence can often be a sign that goes along with the fearful behavior. It's just not eating well. And then feigning sleep is another one. So that's where they're curled up. It appears as though they're sleeping, but in reality, their eyes are slightly open. They're being very vigilant, but it's almost like they're shut down. So that's a huge problem. When you see feigning sleep, that's a big indication that this cat needs behavior mod right away to start to feel better so that they can actually relax in their environment. The function of fearful behavior, that's super easy. This is to keep you safe. So if you are scared of things, you're not going to go up to them, you're going to avoid them, and that can keep you safe. So a little bit of fear is adaptive. It makes sense to be a little bit fearful of things. The problem is when you're sort of bombarded with triggers that you're fearful of and it's just nowhere is safe. There can be some cats where there are certain things are the triggers. So maybe being reached for, or maybe it's a person coming in or a certain type of person. And the more you can identify distinct triggers, the easier it is to work on. The hardest type of fear to work on is when it's just global. It's just everything is scary. There's sort of no respite for this scariness. One big thing with working with fearful cats is to respect their boundaries. So they are little beings with preferences, and we should not be going right into their space unless it's medically necessary. So we should really be respecting their autonomy and giving them choice about interacting with us, but then making interactions with us really, really amazing. It's really reinforcing to interact with us. But if you choose not to, that's your choice for now. We're still going to do things to make your environment more comfortable and to make you hopefully help you feel more comfortable. But we're always going to give you the choice to interact with us. We're never going to just grab you and hold you. That's a technique called flooding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. You can't reinforce fear with food. So you cannot give food to a fearful cat and then the next time around they're more fearful because of the food. So you can definitely interact with a cat in a way that will make them more fearful. That's not what I'm saying. But you can't use food and then create a cat who is more fearful. And an example that I've heard that I really like, and I can't remember where this came from, but if you're scared of spiders and I put a spider in front of you on the table and then I give you $100 bill, the next day when I put a spider next to you on the table, you're not going to be more scared because I gave you $100 bill. You're going to be like, is this the money spider? Like, am I getting more money? And so you can't reinforce fear with that external reinforcer. You can definitely rush and go right into the cat's space, and you can make the problem worse. But giving them treats or comfort or something that they want at that time is not going to reinforce their fear. It's the same as their hiding spaces. A lot of people say, well, at some point you have to take the hiding place away. No way. I'm never going to take the hiding place away. I always want to give them the choice to go back and hide in their cage if they need to. So that brings us to housing. So you always want to have a hiding place for a cat who is showing fearful behavior in the shelter. Ideally, they're in a top cage, not a bottom cage, if you have these kind of double-tiered cages like a lot of places do. It can be a hiding place like a box or a paper bag or a little plastic hiding box like the kittens there. It can be a towel or a sheet across the front of the cage. But you always want to give them the option to go somewhere where they can be kind of completely hidden. The ones I can think of that weren't great is you do want to be able to, at least if you're going to be doing behavior modification, you need to be able to have some access to them after you move things. So you shouldn't do a carrier pointed towards the back of the cage, because then there's no way to drop some food for that cat safely. You're either trying to move the carrier, which is going to freak out the cat, or reach around and you can't see what the cat is doing. So it's great to have a hiding place where they can feel safe and secure, but you can still access them if needed. And this goes for foster homes as well. So make sure it's a quiet area if possible. I know that can really be at a premium in shelters, but maybe designating a certain place as this is the area for cats who are a little bit more stressed or fearful. Again, making sure they have a top cage, or doing office fosters. So if you have distinct office spaces and you can put a couple cats in each, I would defer to the shelter veterinarian's guidelines to see how many cats you want to put in an office. You don't want to overload an office. You want to make sure I think it's 18 square feet per cat is what you need. Double check that on the shelter standards. But if you have extra space that you can move cats into, that can be a really great move for a fearful cat. It allows them to not only have typically a quieter space, it also limits the number of people that who are interacting with them, because typically it's that maybe a couple caregivers and the person whose office it is. And that can be really helpful for a cat who's settling in and starting to feel better as well. And you want to try to minimize the number of moves. So the more moves equals greater stress for the cat. So when a cat who's being really fearful comes in, you want to make sure that they get a top cage right from the start. If they go in a bottom cage, now you're going to adding another move to get them to a top cage. If you are approved to put them right into an office foster, that's a great move as well. And sometimes moving these cats into a regular foster home can be a good move, so that they can, again, get quiet work with a limited number of people. And we can see how much of this is they're freaked out in the shelter versus how much is they're not socialized very well. They don't have a good socialization history that informs them that all of these things are safe and normal. So one of the things that we did, my team and I did at Lollipop Farm, was we were able to take over a bathroom. So it was like a single room, handicap accessible bathroom with a window. So we worked with the maintenance team and were able to design some vertical space that was our first prototype. They eventually changed to more open shelving that we would then place hiding boxes on instead of the tubes. The tubes were a little bit hard to work with. But we had vertical territory. We had lots of enrichment in there. We used a diaper changing area as vertical territory. And then we had a very limited number of people who were approved. So the behavior team, cat staff would get training to do behavior modification with these guys. And then we would train office staff actually to go in and clean. It's really difficult to be both the person who's going to do behavior modification with the cat and teach them that, people aren't scary, if you have to go in and be the scary person who's cleaning their area twice a day. Spot cleaning protocols are great, helping keeping cleaning a little bit less stressful, but even so, it can be a very scary experience to have someone come in and sort of fluff up all your stuff and move things around and maybe wipe things down. So we wanted it to be completely separate people. And it worked really well. We were able to reach a lot of cats who were really struggling in individual cage settings or even office foster settings because it was a super quiet area. And again, we had a lot of control over who was going in and out. We eventually put a camera in there so we could watch what they were doing when we weren't in the room. And it was great. So if you have a little space, it's something that I would encourage you to think about doing. It was something where it was a lot of cross-departmental communication and coordination with getting approval from the med team and the clinic about who could go into the colony. And then because multiple people would work with the cats every week, we had a couple binders, one for each cat. And actually it was just one big binder, but different folders for each cat and with how they were doing for the day. So what had you done? What was their response? And then any notes. And our space was big enough for about 4 adult cats. So we would usually have 3 or 4 cats in at a time, depending on how they related to one another. And that was one of the reasons we got the cameras, so we could sort of make sure that there weren't any social issues going on with the cats when we had a cat who wasn't making progress. But this was a great program, a really nice way to reach a lot of cats who weren't able to be reached in a traditional setting. So the basics of a behavior mod plan for fearful cats in a shelter would really be patience. It can be a really long process. So in the Lollipop Farm program, we would give cats about 6+ weeks, especially if we had seen even a little tiny bit of progress in that time. We would keep working with them. So it's definitely a long-term investment occasionally if you're doing this. And I think it's worth it because in the end, instead of putting a cat who's super fearful into a home, they're coming from a foster, they're coming from a behavior mod program at the shelter, and they're much more confident and they tend to settle into their home a lot faster. They do better in a new situation much more quickly than cats who didn't have this prep and this confidence building. And it's pretty simple. So it's all about pairing your presence with really good food and sometimes toys. You can gradually offer physical contact. So you're always there to offer petting, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit. But you're never there to impose petting. Petting is a conversation. There should be back and forth. It shouldn't be about, I'm just going to go to the cat and pet the cat, and I don't really care what the cat's doing. Oh, they're not moving away, so they like it. That is not true. And really, it's all about slow, gradual physical contact. So you don't want to grab and hold them. This is still, unfortunately, a really common practice to do with kittens, especially really small kittens, is to grab and hold them and just sort of not let them go until they kind of calm down. But I would argue they're not calming down. They're entering a state called learned helplessness, which means that the animal realizes there's nothing they can do to escape, so they just stop trying. And that's actually a really damaging psychological process to go through and a really, really poor state to be in. That's a very poor quality of life. So flooding can have some really negative effects. And I'll show you this in a couple of examples in a minute, but it can really create a cat who is very fearful of hands in particular. And then you're working on desensitizing them to hands instead of just right from the start, desensitizing them to humans as a whole and giving them a lot of choice in the process. But yes, it can take a long time. So depending on your shelter and resources, developing a good foster program can be a good option for this as well. And again, even though I think the older style of thinking, we thought, okay, we need to just get these cats into regular homes and then support people. But in my experience, if you have a skilled person to do kind of the first go round of behavior mod and help to desensitize that cat to being around humans, it goes much faster and much easier the second time around for your adopters. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple different kittens who came through our behavior mod program at Lollipop Farm. So one is Achilles. He was a little bit more than the classic popcorn kitten. So he was found as a solo kitten, and it was very hard for them to clean or tidy his cage. He would hiss and spit and charge at them and scratch, and he was a difficult little guy to handle. He was at the shelter for about 5 days, and he had to be burritoed to be vaccinated. And that's sort of different. So if you have to use low stress handling tactics to vaccinate a cat, that's different than holding them, burritoing them, and holding them for socialization purposes. But he was only briefly burritoed to be vaccinated. Otherwise, he wasn't handled at the shelter because they couldn't. And so he ended up coming to foster at my house. And this is him the first night hiding behind the toilet, just screaming at me. And if anyone saw me talk about kitten socialization a couple years ago at the last in-person New England Fed conference, they got to see some video of Achilles screaming, and then being really scared the first few days. So it took about a week, and he was starting to get really interested in interacting with me and my hands and being petted. I think one thing with Cat working with Fearful behavior modification is that once you get to the point where they're okay enough with your hands that you can gently pet their cheeks and behind their ears, that feels really good to them. And so it helps even more to then be able to interact with them in that way. So if you are teaching them that your hands are a scary thing, it's going to be hard to get to that point where you can pet their ears and, pet their cheeks and really appreciate them.
Rebecca, we have a quick question about how old was Achilles when all this?
Achilles was like kind of on the edge. I think he was between, I'm trying to think. It was hard. I don't think they even had a weight on him when he came to my house. But I think he was around between I'm going to say 6 to 10 weeks. I don't really remember. So he wasn't teeny tiny, but he wasn't 4 months old. And I think probably the route that question was taking was the traditional thinking for cats is that the critical socialization period kind of ends very early. And if they don't have a positive association or positive contact with humans before then, that they have to live outside and they're never going to be a pet cat. And in my experience, that's, a lot of cats don't read the textbook on that. It's a lot more fluid than really what that allows. And so we've definitely been able to work with older kittens who come in and definitely do not have socialization histories. So he was definitely past his critical socialization period, but he wasn't that old. He wasn't 6 months old or anything.
Okay. And we have one other question. How does the length of stay for socialization affect adoption rates as well as emissions of other cats?
Yeah, I think those are all really good questions that you would have to think about for your own community. I think for us, the Shy Cat Colony gave us the space because it was a new space that hadn't been in animal space before. So it allowed us to take a lot of time with cats that we hadn't been able to take that kind of time with before. And they were either, going outside or, placed as barn cats, or they were placed indoor, but then they needed a lot of follow-up, or they just weren't very successful or didn't thrive. So it is a long time to work with a cat for sure. But if you're in a position where you have space in your shelter, and you have the staff time to do it, I think it's very worthwhile to do it and to work with some of these cats again to get them in a better place. But if you're in a place where we have more admissions calls than we can handle, we're scheduling people out, then maybe it's not the time yet to work as intensely with these guys, and you want to focus more on placing them and supporting them after they get home, and maybe giving people some of these behavior mod tips for post-adoption. It's so tough though, because I think there's such interesting interactions between live release rate and length of stay, and also number of animals helped, because one of those things kind of has to give at some point. It's very interesting, but it's really a very community and organization specific decision about who to spend those time and resources on. But I definitely, as a cat behavior consultant, am here to make the case that I think some of these fearful cats definitely deserve some of that time and attention in the shelter. Hopefully that answers the question. All right. So Achilles, he spent, I think, about 3 weeks at my house. And by the end, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And by the end, he could be out with the adult cats and he would play with them. He would interact with me and one other person who was regularly in the house, and enjoyed petting and attention, and would come right to us. And it was, I think, a quick turnaround because he was getting very consistent handling, very consistent training sessions. He had all the choice. So I would go in with some delicious food, and if he wanted to come out and make a couple steps towards me and eat the food, that was great. And then maybe one day the food would be a little bit in my hand, or I would hold it on a spoon and then gradually work my hand up the spoon until he was eating out of my hand. But he didn't, he was scared of humans because he didn't understand what humans were. So he hadn't had very many negative interactions with humans. And so it was easier to make a quicker turnaround with him. And what he turned into was a cat who, his name's Philip now. So this was an update from his family. He's extremely social and he loves to be picked up and cuddled. And I just sent them an email to ask, like, how is he doing? I didn't prompt them with, like, remember, he was so scared. So these were all things that they just offered on their own. And he does very well with guests. And interestingly, they had an older female cat who is more shy with people. So they're like, he's a good example for her of just like going right up to people and welcoming them to the house. And he had an older female cat that he lived with who he played and cuddled with her as well. And I think when I think about Achilles and other kittens we've worked with like this, they often turn into these cats who like being touched because they get such concentrated work for a few weeks in a row, all about like, ooh, you're going to let me like touch your head and pet your head a little bit. You like that? Oh, and also here's some tuna. Amazing. So you're getting really potent counter conditioning and desensitization to being handled. And that can really lead to this love of being touched and handled. So I was expecting that because we've seen that a lot of times. I wasn't expecting as much the extremely social, but it just goes to show you that these fearful kittens who I think in years past at that organization, he would probably have gone as a barn cat, and not, we wouldn't have tried to socialize him. And there's sometimes in there is a very nice pet cat, just takes a little bit of work and digging right in the beginning. And to give you another example of a very different circumstance is Pomona. And Pomona was a cat who was found as a stray, basically like laid out in someone's yard. She was very, very sick. And she was very young at that point. She was like less than 6 weeks. So right when she came in, she was so sick, she just couldn't move a lot. And she had a lot of medical intervention. And so there was a lot of very necessary invasive handling at the start. She had to be on fluids. They were doing a lot with her and handling and touching her a lot, taking her temperature, that kind of thing. And then as she started to feel a little bit better, people would pick her up and hold her for socialization. And I actually got called in to look at her because they were like, does she like this? Because she would purr. So they would pick her up and she would purr, but she basically wouldn't do anything else. She was just sort of like tucked in a tight little ball and purring, but not interacting with them at all. And then over time, she started to show aggression when being reached for. So as she started to feel better, she started to show her displeasure about hands reaching for her. So what we did with her is we moved her to office foster, and there she showed a very marked aversion to hands. So she wasn't so much scared of people as a category as with hands, and it had to do with all that grabbing that happened with her. And she's not a one-off, just to tell you. This is definitely a trend. She's just kind of the one that I picked to demonstrate. So often these kittens or cats are like willing to hang out near you. They kind of want to sit where you are, but they don't want to be reached for. So you'll see even some aggression when you reach for them, or definite avoidance when you reach for them. Pomona in particular was much more willing to interact with feet. So this is Pomona here on the right, like playing with my foot, so that she was actually in my office, and I would sit on the ground and eat my lunch with her. And she would like come over and be really interested in basically every part of me that wasn't a hand. And she got really bonded to just me, and then started to be really not friendly to people who came in who tried to touch her. So she wasn't fearful of them. She would sit on my desk, nice, tall, and upright, but if they reached for her, they might get a swat. So she maintained that aversion to handling even as she got older, except with me. So she got better with me, the one person. She didn't generalize it to more people. And I think that kind of goes to show you the difference. Achilles he didn't have really any experience with handling, or very brief experience with being handled. He didn't have any kind of flooding done with him, and he was much faster to turn around. With Pomona, it was a few months that we were working with her. And eventually she, like I said, she really liked me. And then she made friends with another kitten who was in my office. And they ended up getting adopted together. So this is the two of them here. This is Jack. And she had a lot of trouble in her home. So she needed an in-home consultation, and they needed some coaching via email. And I actually stopped hearing from them after they asked, like, do you think we should just let her outside? And I was like, she's never, besides when she was teeny tiny, she's never been outside. I don't think that's a great idea. And I didn't hear from them again. And then months later, I got a text from a staff member who knows them, who to say, oh, I just talked to them and they told me to tell you, Pomona, they just love her so much. It took them a long time to bond, but now she sits with him every night and she sits on people's laps, and it's great. So she likes those two people who live there. She's not keen on visitors still. But it took a lot. It took a lot of, they went through some heartache with her too, because it just took her a lot to actually bond with them. And she did have some other issues crop up when she came in the home. So of the two tracks, these are trends that we see with a lot of invasive handling and, the flooding type of socialization attempts in the beginning. It's a much longer road to get out of that and to get them into like a home with a typical adopter and be successful and happy all around and have a good quality of life than it is if you start out right from the beginning doing counter conditioning, desensitization to handling the right way. Okay, so I talked about this before, but petting should be a conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the best way to pet a cat. And it'll be kind of difficult here too, but why don't we just take a minute? Maybe you can read them off to me, Liam. What do people think? What is the best way to pet a cat? And then also, how does your cat tell you when they're done with petting? So type your answers. I'm going to take a drink of water.
And remember, folks, type it all up in the chat. Uh, head and under chin for some.
Okay. It's a good idea.
Under the chin.
Hmm.
Depends on the cat.
Also, I like that answer too. Good.
Offer hand, swipe up cheek, then between ears.
That's nice too. Okay.
Done
And
with
any,
petting, and then they start to flick tail.
okay.
Yeah, the answers are coming in fast and furious now.
Okay, good.
Comes up to me for petting around head, walks away when finished.
Okay.
Depends on the cat, but I also like letting the cat pet themselves on my hand.
Okay, well, we can stop there because that's actually the answer. Well done.
That
Yeah.
would be Annabelle.
Good job, Annabelle. Way to go. So, yeah, the best way to pet a cat is to let them pet you. Make yourself available for petting by putting your hand near them, and then see if they want petting by observing if they give you a cheek rub or a headbutt. That's definitely the best way. And all the other answers that I heard were good as well. So it's good to know your cat's baseline. It's good to know what they like. In general, cats like being petted around the cheeks and the chin and the back of the base of the ears. If you think about two cats grooming each other, a lot of times that's where another cat would groom them. So that kind of makes sense. And then with how does your cat tell you when they're done with petting? That's the answer that I heard is the most common answer that I get when I ask this, which is they'll walk away. But if you think about it, that's not actually true with every cat. So often they'll stay there, but they won't give you petting anymore. So that's what you want to look for. They stop giving cheek rubs or headbutts. So petting should be a conversation. It should be back and forth. You want to make sure that they're interacting with you and giving you permission. So we're not video. So this is yes. This cat's saying yes. Please pat me. You put your hand out, give a little cheek rub, and then you can pat them. And then you represent your hand, so you always are having this conversation. And then here is a no. I don't want petting. It's not very dramatic, but put my hand out. Cat's not moving away. Cat pushed her ear a little bit, but other than that, not anything notable. But she wasn't giving me a cheek rub or a headbutt, so I know not to pet her. And then we're just going to watch one of these videos, I believe, once they load. Because it's actually Pomona. So I want to show you a little bit of how Pomona used to interact with hands. And you can see how conflicted she is, but also how she's clearly saying, no, I don't want petting right now. So hand is out. She gives it a gentle, no claws swat, but escalates a little bit when the hand doesn't move away fast enough for her liking. You can see otherwise really relaxed posture, but a little twitchiness in the ears. So, this would be a cat. She's small enough that you could physically wrap her in a towel and just hold her. But that would be teaching her just to be faster the next time you went to grab her. So here she is coming up to my hand, but again, not interested. All right. Move on to the next slide. We're going to skip that for now so we can get through some more aggression stuff. Okay, so think about any questions you have for fearful cats. Go ahead and type them in, and we'll cover some of the aggression basics, and then we'll circle back for any questions on the fearful stuff. Okay. So a lot of times we might be dealing with some aggressive behavior in the shelter or in home, and there are some things to consider. So the function of aggression is typically to gain space. So they're asking for space. They're saying, please stop coming up to me. Please back away. Please move away. It can be defensive. So they're really trying to defend themselves. It's coming from a place of fear. It could be offensive. So that's where they'll go towards the trigger. And that comes from a place of frustration. Defensive aggression is much, much more common in cats. And offensive aggression can happen. And it can be pretty scary when it does. But for the most part, you're going to see mostly defensive aggression. So you do want to consider the context that it's happening. So is it in response to something that you're doing that maybe you could change, or is it in response to another thing in the environment that you could change? Again, like I mentioned before, putting up some opaque material so they can't see the other cat. There can be a lot of things done there often when we're seeing this, especially in a shelter setting. You want to determine the trigger. So what is the thing that's triggering this behavior in them? And can we use counter conditioning and desensitization to help them feel better about that specific trigger? Remember, aggression is communication. They're communicating their need for space. And you don't want to punish them to take away any of the warning signs. It's more common in dogs to do this, in my experience, than for cats, but you'll see caretakers will punish the cat for hissing or punish the dog for growling. We want them to do those behaviors to tell us they feel bad. If they feel bad, we want to make sure that we're helping them feel better so they don't need to feel like they have to do those behaviors, but we don't want to take away any of that communication. And we really want to respect their limits. So if it's something where I've had people say to me, I can trim one paw entirely, but then he bites. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? We're going to trim 3 nails then, and we're going to work our way up from there. So you want to make sure that it's not, the trigger isn't you trying to do something that's above what the cat can handle. And then for aggression, particularly in a shelter setting, you do always want to consider staff and public safety. Idiopathic aggression can happen in cats. So that is aggression that is typically offensive, and there is no trigger. There's no clear trigger. We can't figure out a trigger. And there's no underlying medical condition causing it. That would be the trigger. And that can be pretty tough to work with. And if another, quality of life wise, we talked about this a little bit already, but if you're showing aggression on a regular basis, that typically indicates not a good quality of life. A happy cat isn't aggressive on a regular basis. So things to consider, the staff and public safety are very specific to your organization and your community. But just because they're cats, they can still hurt people and other animals. Okay, so one type of aggression that we might commonly see is handling sensitivity. So this is one where we definitely want to have a vet check, in particular for if it is, actually there'll be another slide to tell you what you'd want to look for vet check specifically, but if we go to the vet check and they're totally fine, then you want to make sure that you are using your counter conditioning and desensitization to both break it down, make the trigger easier to handle, and then pair all handling with food. So make sure that you are always working at whatever threshold that they're okay working with. So if they can handle, for now, being restrained for a nail trim, but then as soon as you go to touch their nail with the clippers, you're seeing some aggression, they're going to work just on restraining them for a bit longer and maybe holding their paw out a little bit. Maybe you're going to touch the clipper to the toe, treat, and you're done. So when you do that, when you break it down and you work on counter conditioning each little spot, then things like this can happen. So this is a video of me trimming Johnny's nails, and he has been having his nails trimmed like this since he was a little kitten. So he's really, really used to nail trims. And he purrs, and he usually needs his paws when I do this, which can make it kind of annoying to trim his nails, but I don't mind. I manage. So he gets a couple nails trimmed, and then he gets a little bit of turkey each time. And then you'll pan down and see Grumpkin is waiting to have her nails trimmed. And that's not a typical thing to see in a household with multiple cats, that they line up to get their nails trimmed. But if you work on doing this gradually and using low stress handling techniques, you can definitely get them to a place where they are feeling a lot better about it. And you can do this in a shelter, especially if you know the cat is going to be there for a longer time. Maybe they're getting medical treatment or something like that. So things to absolutely rule out with a medical team for handling sensitivity. So if there's a certain area of the body that's sensitive, so that could be potentially a medical issue. If it's a sudden onset of aggression, so goes back to knowing that cat's baseline, which is so tough in a shelter. But if they've been pretty chilled out and loving handling, and then all of a sudden you see some aggression with handling, that's something to get checked out by the med team. If the cat is declawed, there can be a lot of residual pain from that. So that's definitely something to look at. At Lollipop Farm, we would x-ray all the declawed cats just to check to see if they needed a repair. Or if the cat is a senior cat, then I definitely would get that checked out regardless of anything else. Is there some questions?
We had some comments. Rachel said that she adopted a 4-month-old fearful feral named Mad at the World, which I think is probably the best name ever for a kitten. Yeah. Now 11 years old, Mo is still mad at most people, but super affectionate with her. Mm-hmm. And Lisa says, good job, Rachel. I've learned over the years that working with ferals, not all of them can be successfully socialized, but others fall in the range to what they will accept. And that's kind of a really good point, because people need to manage their expectations when it comes to these animals, because they have their own set of expectations.
Exactly. Respect their limits, right? Sometimes you always want to try to get consent from that animal when you are interacting with them. And the more that you do, even for cats who have great socialization histories, the better off their quality of life is going to be. When the interactions that they have, the physical interactions they have with you, are on their terms, there's so much less stress associated with it. Okay, so moving on to another type of aggressive behavior we see in cats in shelters sometimes and in homes is overstimulation. So weirdly, we call it overstimulation, and the key to this a lot of times is more stimulation. So it doesn't, the words don't really make a ton of sense, but basically, this is often a cat who has a lot of excess energy, or they might have a high stress level. They're kind of on edge. And this can lead to kind of that don't pet me anymore aggression, where you'll see someone say, I was petting her and she came up and sat on my lap and I was petting her and then she bit me out of nowhere. And oftentimes they're not following the ask permission for petting rules of seeing if the cat wants petting before petting them. But oftentimes an overstimulated cat, they're so close to the edge of reaction that any little petting or touch, it can suddenly set them over the edge. So these are cats where we definitely want to look at their enrichment needs. So are these needs getting met? Do they have enough cognitive stimulation? Do they have enough playtime and physical exercise? Is there a way that we can change their environment to get that? So things to look
just
for.
Real quick. This is your 2-minute warning, but we still have the breakout time we can do. We can finish up with the overstimulation or whatever you have, and go from there and do Q&A.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Well, I'll skip that. I'll skip the video of overstimulation for now then, just to tell you it's a twitchy cat. You're going to look for twitchiness. And then I'll see. Housing-wise for overstimulation, you want to make sure that they have as much space as you can give. Viewing access to bird feeders is great if you can create that in your shelter setting. Office fosters for overstimulation can be good as long as the person in the office can respect their boundaries. Catios are amazing. If you have one at Lollipop Farm, There are 3, and 2 of them are associated with group housing, and 1 is for rotation of individual cats. And that was a really nice outlet for some of the overstimulated cats. And then making sure they've got lots of vertical territory for exercise, so perching and climbing spaces. And then things that you would want to make sure happen would be daily exercise. So play, and ideally 4 paws on the floor every single day. You want to make sure they have cognitive enrichment. So this could be puzzle toys or clicker training. Asking permission for petting is a must for any cat, but especially for these cats. And if the cat is twitching, no touching. Play or train instead, and don't punish aggression. So you want to de-escalate any situation that triggers aggression and not escalate the situation. And then I think maybe we'll end there.
We still have a few minutes because, again, we have the breakout session.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to talk about adoption strategies, because I think that's really important to our audience.
Sure.
And I just put out the request for everybody to type in their questions now so we can get to them when you're ready.
Okay, great. So I'll talk just a little bit about adoption strategies then. So I think the key for adoption strategies is you can definitely use comedy, but be honest. There's kind of a trend of, marketing versus counseling. So you don't want to necessarily say every single thing that you're going to tell the person about the cat in their marketing. That's more for counseling. But at the same time, I think you need to be really honest with people, and not gloss over any issues that you've seen. But you need to be objective too. So we, at Lollipop Farm, what we tended to do, and the other shelter, Tompkins, that I worked at as well, it's you really just state what we have observed about the animal and not try to extrapolate a ton or label the cat a certain thing, but really just make sure that the person is well informed and has good post-adoption follow-up if they need it. Oh, and here's my other cat, so you might get to see him. So I think targeting cat people is good. So targeting people who just really like cats and maybe want to learn more about cat behavior by adopting a cat with some behavioral challenges. We at Lollipop Farm, we would usually give them an extra push on social media. And sometimes they would have there would be a special category or special promotion for if we had maybe several cats coming up with a similar issue that they had been working on, they might have a special sale just based on that. So, it's definitely, I think the marketing side of things can be really fun. And again, it's separate from the counseling side, but it is important as well. All right, I'm going to come over and stop sharing my screen. Oh, let me put up right before I do that. Sorry. I'll put up my contact info so you can take a picture of that if you would want. So you can follow Training Young Lions on social media, or email us at info@youngliontraining.com. And we are available for consults. So it's myself. I'm a certified dog behavior consultant and a certified cat behavior consultant. And then the other person is Alexander Ferrante, and she is a certified professional dog trainer. And so we're available for program planning or staff training, or individual animal consults. All right, so now I'm going to close this out. And our website is youngliontraining.com. I'm going to come back over here. And I'm going to enable my camera. Hello.
If you want, stop sharing your screen, too.
Yeah, so sorry. So sorry. Okay.
Perfect. All right. So thank you for all that. That was really good information. And I know we could probably still talk for another hour or so on it. So, and again, if anybody has any questions, go to the Q&A tab and try to get it in now so we can get these questions. I know this is the final presentation of the day, but, we still have some time to talk about this. Nancy gave us a question in the chat of how do you encourage a person to try and stick to behavior modification if they had the cat a long time and problems for a long time?
I think that one of the tactics I use in that scenario is to kind of lead them through questions to realize that like, well, what they've been doing hasn't really been working. That's why we're here, or that's why they're talking to me. And I think also explaining to people that practice makes perfect, and their animal, their cat has been practicing whatever behavior you're trying to modify for, it could be years now before they reach out for help. So those are kind of usually my two talking points for people like that, is that, it's taken a while to get into this situation, a lot of practice. So it's going to take some time, and just setting that expectation right from the start is one way that I deal with that. But yeah, I think a lot of times people say, oh, I tried that. Oh, I tried that. And sometimes it's just, okay, well, maybe we just haven't tried it for long enough. So I'll often have people to commit to like, can we commit to doing this for the next 3 weeks consistently and then reevaluate? And often that helps just give people a timeline instead of like, you're indefinitely going to do this forever, which they might be, but at least giving them a timeline to work towards and then see some good progress is helpful.
Okay. So yeah, we have quite a few comments. I don't really see any new questions popping up. I do have one question for you about behavior of cats and everything. And this is something that has taken over the internet for a while, because God knows you can go on YouTube at any point in time and see a video of a cat somewhere. But there's what do you think it is doing to the cats when you see those videos of the cucumbers being put next to them and they freak out? Because I can't see that as a positive reinforcement for that cat.
Definitely not. I have read there's some speculation that it might be tapping into like sort of a predator alert. When they turn around and see that, they think like, is that a predator? And that's why they're so startled. And yeah, I definitely would not recommend doing that. I wouldn't do that with a cat. Yeah, I think it's kind of a mean joke to play on a cat. I much prefer the viral videos where you wake them up with like by putting a really nice smelling treat on their nose. I think those are much better.
All right. We do have a question from Eve. Do you have a good resource for inappropriate litter box issues that Meds has already been taken care of taken out as a reason?
Yeah. Let me think. A good resource. There is. So when I was at Lollipop, we made a series of videos. There is a 90-second video. If you look at the Lollipop Farm YouTube page, it's a pet peeves video on litter box do's and don'ts that kind of lays out the best practices for litter boxes in 90 seconds. So making sure that all of those are addressed is really important. But in terms of a sort of more detailed or handout, I don't have a good one, unfortunately. Except for, those things, it might be worth doing a consult with a cat behavior consultant about. And those are pretty easily done virtually. I have people like walk around the house with their phone or with their laptop to show me what's going on. Because it could be so many things. Like if there's multiple cats in the house, it could be a relationship issue. If, there's other animals, it could be an issue. There could be, I've gone into houses where it's literally just like, they've put a bunch of air fresheners in the area and the cats are like, I don't like the smell of that. And they're avoiding the boxes just because of the air fresheners. So that's a complicated issue for sure. And that's probably why there aren't a ton of good, easy resources. Here's one of my cats. Hey, John.
And I think this has also been a really important conversation, because the cat behavior of what we've learned about cats over the past, 10, 15, 20 years is, a lot more than we knew back in the day. And it's just impressive about how alien cats' thinking is compared to ours. So, and most of the problems I've seen is again, we talked about the expectations that people have because they feel they should treat their animals like a Disney character. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. And Adora just mentioned the fact how many people that she sees, treat their cats as dogs. So, mm-hmm. Which, again, very different animal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely different animal. But at the same time, they learn, the theories behind everything are the same. And so while you don't want to misinterpret the body language, by thinking like, well, if a dog did that, it would mean this was good. I actually just had a client who has been a dog training client, and adopted 2 cats for the first time. And she's like, I'm really learning cat behavior, because she thought, oh, they're wagging their tails. That's like a good thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, so that part is just so different. But, using positive reinforcement, the techniques behind behavior modification are all very similar. But, motivators are often different.
Okay. And Lisa commented the fact that her dog began getting into chasing the red dot as well, too. His pack is his cats, and sometimes the behaviors are cross-adopted. So that just means dogs can learn to be cats.
Right, yes. Yeah, I've definitely met, it's very interesting when people say, I have a dog-like cat, what they mean, and then I have a cat-like dog, what they mean, because there's such a spectrum of personalities in both species that, I think we don't give them enough credit for.
Okay. All right. I'm going to make one last call for any questions in the Q&A section. So now's the time to put it in. I do have one other question about walking your cat on a leash. Mm-hmm. I've been seeing that as a growing trend lately, and I've always been more concerned about what's around the cat, not so much the cat on the leash. So what can come and possibly try to grab the cat. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that leash walks can be good for cats who are really bold and confident, and who maybe came from an outdoor space and want to go back. There's definitely a couple guidelines that I give anyone who wants to do that, and that is the cats shouldn't walk out of the house. They should go into a carrier or something, or leave out a different door that you never use. You don't want to get them used to walking out the door, even if they're on harness. And then, it is a lot about making sure the cat is having a good time, and making sure the harness is fit appropriately. That's another big mistake. Kitty holster is a good harness for cats. That's the one that I recommend. And it's pretty well tolerated. It's a vest style harness. But getting them used to it gradually and really evaluating whether that's a good enrichment strategy for them is key. So both of my cats are indoor cats, and I this winter trained Grumpkin to ride in a harness, or in a stroller, because she is a little bit more confident and outgoing than Johnny. And the first time we went outside in it, she loves going in the stroller in the house, but we went outside and she was clearly freaked. She was not happy. And she has previously gone outside on a harness, but I thought, well, maybe this will be a nice, more protected way for her to go out. So same kind of thing you were thinking of. And she was not into it. And I think some of it was the lack of control over where she was. She didn't have that autonomy anymore. So yeah, but that's a long rambling answer to say it can be good for some cats, but you got to make sure you're evaluating it right.
All right. And the last question we have is from Eve. High fives. Are they worth the time to train to help with adoptability?
Oh, I think high fives are really fun. When I worked in shelters, we definitely would train high fives sometimes. I think that a lot of times the cats who you're going to get a really good high five from really quickly don't need a ton of help with adoption. They're outgoing and inquisitive and willing to, interact with people for treats very easily. But at the same time, if it's something where you're making a video of a cat, and we've done that before too, or we had done that before where, look at the interactions with this person and this cat, and this could be you if you, follow these steps. But for now, you're just going to see a cat who's really avoidant of you. So that could be a cute thing to put in a video like that. It's really easy to teach, though. So yeah, it shouldn't take a ton of time to teach.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up our time. And I just wanted to say thank you. This was a really good and informative presentation. I wish you the best of luck in your future training opportunities. And we look forward to seeing what the next animal that you helped was going to be. I'd like to thank everybody who is here watching it. Thank you guys for coming on. You guys asked a lot of questions, a lot of good participation, and thank you for coming to the conference. This has been our first virtual conference, and we think it worked out pretty well, thanks to speakers like Rebecca. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a really great day. Enjoy the weather outside.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Bye.